Some people don't wait because they have hope. They wait because they don't know how to stop. Every Friday night at exactly 7:15 p.m., Daniel Brooks sat at the same table by the window, the one with a quiet view of the street where headlights passed like slow-moving stars, and no matter the season, whether it was the soft chill of early fall or the humid warmth of a late summer evening, he always wore the same dark jacket, always ordered the same black coffee and one extra glass of water, and always placed a small, worn music box at the center of the table as if it belonged there more than he did. The staff had stopped asking about it months ago, stopped offering a second menu, stopped wondering why a man would sit across from an empty chair as if someone invisible was running late, because routines like his had a way of making people uncomfortable and discomfort. In a place meant for quiet dinners and low conversations, was something people learned to ignore, but the music box was harder to ignore, because at exactly 7:15, Daniel would wind it with careful fingers, slow and precise, like he was afraid it might break if he rushed, and a soft, delicate melody would spill out into the air, something old, something almost forgotten, a tune that didn't belong in a modern restaurant with polished floors and dim overhead lights. And still, he never looked down at it while it played, his eyes always fixed on the door as if at any second someone might walk in. Someone he had already forgiven for being late. That was the part Claire Whitmore noticed first, not the man, not the empty chair, but the music, because she had been standing near the back that evening reviewing numbers in her head, thinking about quarterly projections and expansion plans, when the melody reached her in a way that didn't match the rest of the room, and for a brief second, everything else went quiet, like her mind had stepped out of the present without asking permission, and she found herself turning, slowly, toward the source of it, toward a man she had never spoken to but somehow felt like she had seen before in a place she couldn't quite remember. Claire owned the restaurant, along with 27 others across the state, and she had built her reputation on noticing details others missed. But this felt different, because it wasn't about business, it wasn't about efficiency or customer behavior. It was something softer, something harder to define. The way the man's hand lingered on the music box a second longer after winding it. The way he straightened the glass of water across from him even though no one reached for it. The way his shoulders seemed steady, but his eyes held something that didn't settle. She asked one of the servers quietly, "Does he come here often?" And the answer came just as quietly. "Every Friday. Same time, same table. Always alone." And Claire nodded like that explained enough. But it didn't, because being alone wasn't the strange part. It was the way he wasn't really alone. Not in the way he sat, not in the way he waited, and without fully deciding to. She took a step forward, then another, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by something that felt uncomfortably familiar, something she couldn't name yet, until she was standing just a few feet away from his table, close enough to hear the faint ticking of the music box as the melody slowed. And just before it stopped, Daniel looked up, not surprised, not startled, just aware, as if he had been expecting someone, just not her. And for a moment neither of them spoke. The space between them filled with the last fragile notes of a song that seemed to carry more memory than sound, until Claire finally asked, her voice softer than she intended, "Do you always play that at the same time?" And Daniel glanced down at the music box, then back at her, and gave a small, almost absent smile before answering. "Only when I'm waiting." And something in the way he said it made the word feel heavier than it should have been, like it wasn't just about time, like it was about years, about promises that stretched longer than they were meant to. And Claire hesitated, just for a second, before asking the question that would change everything. "Who are you waiting for?" And Daniel didn't answer right away, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the music box, as if the answer might be hidden inside it. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. Someone who said they'd come back, on a Friday night. And he glanced at the empty chair across from him, just briefly, before looking back at the door again, as if the story wasn't finished yet, as if the waiting still meant something. Claire did not walk away after that answer, even though she told herself she should, because she had meetings waiting, numbers that needed her attention, a life built on decisions made quickly and without hesitation. But something about the way Daniel said the word waiting stayed with her in a way she could not explain. So instead of leaving, she took the empty chair across from him and sat down slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of the moment. And for a second, Daniel looked at her like he was about to say something, like he might ask her to leave, but he did not. He simply shifted his gaze back toward the window as another set of headlights passed by, soft and distant, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind that felt full, like something was forming underneath it. Claire rested her hands lightly on the table, her eyes drawn again to the music box. The small scratches along its edges, the way the hinge looked slightly worn, like it had been opened and closed more times than it should have been, and she found herself asking, "That song, where did you get it?" And Daniel's expression softened, just slightly, the kind of change most people would miss. But Claire did not, because she had spent years reading people who tried to hide what they felt. And he said, "It was not mine at first," pausing as if choosing what to say next mattered more than finishing the sentence. "I was asked to keep it safe." And Claire felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain, not exactly, but recognition without context, like hearing a word you know but cannot place. She leaned back a little, studying him more carefully now, noticing details she had not before. The faint crease between his brows that did not go away even when he was calm. The way his hand stayed close to the music box as if it grounded him. And she said quietly, "And you believe they are still coming back for it?" And Daniel let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Belief is not really the point anymore," he said, his voice steady but carrying something deeper underneath. "Some promises, you keep them even when you are the only one who remembers." And Claire looked down at the table for a moment, her fingers brushing lightly against the cool surface as something in his words settled into her, in a way that felt too personal for a conversation that had just started, because she knew something about promises too, about the ones that shaped you without asking, the ones you carried even when life moved on without them. The server passed by quietly and placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of Daniel, then hesitated, glancing at Claire before setting down another glass of water without asking. And for the first time, the empty chair did not feel entirely empty, even though nothing had changed, and Daniel noticed it too, his eyes flicking briefly to the glass before returning to Claire. "You do not have to stay," he said gently, not dismissing her, not pushing her away, just stating something simple. And Claire met his gaze, calm and certain in a way she rarely allowed herself to be outside of business. "I know," she replied, her voice softer now, "but I think I want to understand." And that was the moment something shifted, small but undeniable, because Daniel nodded, just once, as if accepting her presence not as an interruption, but as something that had quietly become part of the routine. And outside, the clock moved past 7:30, the rhythm of the restaurant continuing as it always did. But at that table by the window, something had changed without either of them fully realizing it yet. Because for the first time in a long time, Daniel was not the only one listening when the music box began to play again in his memory. And Claire, without knowing why, felt like she had just stepped into a story that had been waiting for her long before she arrived. The next Friday, Claire arrived 10 minutes earlier than she needed to, which was something she had not done for anything that was not a business negotiation in years. And she did not question it too much. She simply told herself it was curiosity, that she wanted to observe the pattern again, to confirm that what she had felt the week before was real and not just a moment that would fade once routine returned. But when she stepped inside and saw the table by the window still empty, something in her chest felt strangely unsettled, like she had arrived too soon to something that had not yet begun. And without thinking, she walked over and placed her hand lightly on the back of the chair Daniel always used, as if checking that it was still there, still real, before pulling her hand away quickly, almost embarrassed by the gesture. At exactly 7:14, the door opened, and Daniel walked in with the same quiet presence, the same dark jacket, the same steady pace. But this time, when his eyes moved across the room, they stopped a fraction of a second earlier than usual, because Claire was already there, already sitting at the table, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something unexpected in his expression, not discomfort, not surprise exactly, but recognition, like a routine had shifted and he was deciding whether to accept it or not. And Claire gave a small, calm nod, as if to say she knew she was early, knew she was stepping into something that was not originally hers. and Daniel responded by setting the music box down between them without a word. The soft click of it touching the table sounding louder than it should have. "You are early," he said after a moment, his voice even, but not distant, and Claire allowed a faint smile. "I could say the same about you." And for a brief second, something almost like warmth passed between them, subtle and quiet, but enough to make the space feel different than it had the week before. When 7:15 came, Daniel reached for the music box again, his fingers moving with the same careful precision, but this time, Claire did not just listen, she watched, noticing the way his hand slowed just before releasing it, like he was holding onto something invisible, and as the melody began, soft and familiar in a way she still could not fully explain, a memory brushed against her mind, faint and distant, like light through fog, and she found herself leaning forward slightly without realizing it. "It sounds familiar," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, and Daniel glanced up, his eyes searching her face for something he could not yet name. "It does that sometimes," he replied. "People think they have heard it before." But Claire shook her head gently, her brows pulling together as she tried to hold onto the feeling. "No, not like that," she said, her voice softer now, almost uncertain, more like, "I should remember where it comes from." And the moment those words left her lips, something in Daniel's expression shifted, not fully, not enough to reveal anything, but enough to suggest that her reaction mattered in a way he had not expected. He closed the music box slowly, the melody fading into a quiet that felt heavier this time, and for a second, neither of them spoke, because something had just moved beneath the surface, something neither of them could fully see yet, but both of them felt. And Claire looked at him again, this time not as a curious observer, not as a business owner noticing a pattern, but as someone standing at the edge of a memory she could not quite reach, and she asked, more gently than before, "Who asked you to keep it safe?" And Daniel did not answer right away, his gaze dropping briefly to the music box before lifting back to her, steady but careful, like he was measuring something that could not be taken back once spoken. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all night. "A little girl," he said, and Claire felt her breath catch, just slightly, for a reason she did not yet understand, as Daniel continued. "She told me she would come back for it on a Friday." And this time, when he looked at the door, it was not just habit, it was something deeper, something that had been waiting longer than either of them had realized, and Claire, sitting across from him, felt that same quiet pull again, stronger now, like. Whatever story this was, it was beginning to include her whether she was ready or not. That night, long after the restaurant lights dimmed and the last table had been cleared, Claire found herself standing alone in her office, staring at nothing while the faint echo of the melody lingered in her mind like it refused to leave, and she tried to return to her usual rhythm, reviewing reports, answering emails, making decisions that normally came easily, but something had shifted. Something quiet and persistent that kept pulling her attention back to a small wooden music box and a man who waited without asking for anything in return. And what unsettled her most was not his story, but the feeling that part of it was not unfamiliar. Over the next few days, she caught herself distracted in moments that used to belong entirely to work, pausing mid-conversation, losing track of numbers, even replaying that short exchange in her head more times than she could count. Especially the way Daniel had said "a little girl" with a kind of calm that felt practiced, like a truth he had carried for so long it no longer needed explanation. And yet, the more Claire thought about it, the less distant it felt, like something just beyond reach, a memory that refused to fully surface. By Thursday night, she gave in to the pull she had been resisting, opening an old storage box she had not touched in years, one she had moved from apartment to apartment without ever unpacking. And as she lifted the lid, a faint scent of paper and time met her, quiet and familiar, and she began sorting through old photographs, letters, small objects she had once decided were important enough to keep but not important enough to revisit, until her fingers paused on a thin, worn envelope with no return address, and something in her chest tightened before she even opened it, because even without seeing what was inside, she felt that same unexplainable recognition. The same quiet pull she had felt when the music box first played. Inside was a folded piece of paper, aged and soft at the edges, and as she unfolded it carefully, Her eyes moved over handwriting that was not hers, not exactly, but close. Enough to feel personal, like something written by a younger version of someone she used to be, and the words were simple, almost childlike, but they landed with a weight she was not prepared for. I will come back on a Friday. I promise. Claire's breath caught, her fingers tightening slightly around the paper as a flicker of memory broke through. Not clear, not complete, but enough to shake something loose, a moment of being small, of holding on to something tightly, of saying words that felt bigger than she understood at the time. And for a second, she closed her eyes, trying to hold on to it, trying to pull the rest of it forward, but it slipped away just as quickly, leaving behind only the feeling, the echo of something that mattered. She looked down at the note again, her heart beating a little faster now, not from fear, but from the growing sense that the story Daniel was telling was not as distant from her as it should have been, and the thought came quietly, almost reluctantly, but once it appeared, it did not leave. What if the girl he was waiting for had not disappeared, had not forgotten, but had simply not recognized the place she was meant to return to? Claire folded the note carefully, placing it back into the envelope with a steadiness she did not quite feel, and as she closed the box, she knew one thing with absolute certainty, something she could not explain but could not ignore either, that when Friday came again, she would not just be sitting across from Daniel as a curious observer. She would be there because something in his waiting had begun to reach into her own past, and whatever connection existed between that music box, that promise, and the memory she could not fully recall, she was no longer willing to leave it unanswered. Friday arrived with a quiet kind of weight that Claire could feel from the moment she woke up, like the day itself was holding something just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. And she moved through her morning differently this time, slower, more aware, as if rushing might cause her to miss something important, and by the time evening came, she had already read the note in her mind a dozen times, the simple promise echoing in a way that felt too precise to be coincidence. When she stepped into the restaurant, the familiar space felt subtly changed, not because anything was different, but because she was, and she walked directly to the table by the window without hesitation, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of it before she sat down, her heart steady but present in a way she could not ignore. At 7:15, Daniel arrived, just as he always did, but the moment he saw her already seated, something in his expression softened, like a quiet acceptance had taken root, and he placed the music box between them again, the small object now carrying more meaning than either of them had spoken aloud. "You came back," he said simply, and Claire met his gaze, holding it a fraction longer than before. "So did you," she replied, her voice calm. But underneath it was something more, something closer to certainty than curiosity. When the time came, Daniel reached for the music box, but before he could wind it, Claire spoke again, more gently this time. "Can you tell me about her?" And the question did not feel like an intrusion. It felt like an opening, and Daniel paused, his hand resting lightly on the box as if grounding himself before answering. And when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet warmth that had not been there before. She was not supposed to be there that day. He began, his eyes not on Claire, but somewhere just beyond her, like he was looking into a memory instead of the room. It was raining, and everything felt rushed, like the world was moving too fast for a child to keep up with, he said, choosing his words carefully, not avoiding the past, but not letting it overwhelm the present either. "I found her sitting alone, holding this music box like it was the only thing keeping her calm." And Claire felt her breath slow, her attention narrowing on every word, because something in the way he spoke matched the faint fragments in her mind. "She would not let go of it," Daniel continued softly. "Not even when I told her she would be okay. Not even when things settled down and it was time for her to go." And his hand finally moved, opening the music box gently, but not yet winding it. "So I told her I would keep it safe until she came back for it," he said. And now he looked at Claire again, steady and open in a way that felt different than before. "And she looked at me like that made perfect sense, like promises were something you could always trust." And Claire felt something shift inside her, not a full memory, not yet, but a piece falling into place, a feeling that was no longer distant but close enough to touch, and she reached into her bag slowly, her fingers closing around the envelope she had brought with her. The paper inside slightly worn from being unfolded and refolded. And for a moment, she hesitated, not because she doubted what she was about to do, but because she understood that once it was done, something between them would change in a way that could not be undone. And when she finally placed the folded note on the table between them, her hand lingered there just a second longer before pulling away, and Daniel's eyes dropped to it, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly as if he recognized something before even reading it. And when he opened it carefully, the silence between them deepened, not empty, but full, and Claire watched him as his gaze moved over the simple words written in a child's hand. And she did not say anything, did not explain, because some truths did not need to be spoken immediately. They needed to be felt first, and as Daniel lifted his eyes back to hers, something unspoken passed between them, something that carried the weight of years of waiting, of a promise that had not been broken, just delayed, and for the first time, the space between them no longer felt like a distance, but like a bridge that had finally begun to close. Daniel did not speak right away after reading the note, his fingers still holding the paper as if it carried more weight than it should, and Claire could see it clearly now, the shift in him that was no longer subtle, no longer something hidden behind routine, because the quiet steadiness he had carried every Friday was beginning to crack just enough to let something real come through. And when he finally looked up at her, there was no confusion in his eyes, only a slow, careful recognition. Like a memory he had protected for years was finally standing in front of him in a form he had not expected. "You kept it," he said softly, his voice lower than before, not asking but confirming. And Claire nodded once, her hands resting still on the table even though her pulse had begun to rise. "I did not know what it meant back then," she admitted, her voice calm but carrying something deeper now, something more personal than anything she had said before. "I just knew I was not supposed to throw it away." And Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping briefly to the music box before returning to her, as if placing two pieces of the same story side by side for the first time. "You were very quiet," he said after a moment, and there was a faint warmth in his tone now, something almost like a memory reshaping itself. "You held on to this." He tapped the music box gently, like it was the only thing that made sense in that moment. And Claire felt something inside her shift again, stronger this time, more defined, because the way he described it was not distant anymore. It was familiar, like hearing your own past spoken out loud by someone else. And she found herself leaning in slightly without realizing it. "I remember feeling safe," she said slowly, searching for the words as they formed. "Not because I understood anything, but because you did not rush me." And Daniel's expression softened further, the lines in his face easing in a way that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with release. Like a tension he had carried quietly was beginning to loosen. The music box sat between them, still closed, but present, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. And after a few seconds, Daniel reached for it again, his movements slower than usual, more deliberate. And this time, when he wound it, he did not look at the door, he looked at Claire, and as the melody began to play, soft and steady, something changed in the space between them, something that no longer felt like waiting but like arrival. Claire listened closely, her eyes not leaving his, and the sound no longer felt distant or unfamiliar. It felt anchored, connected to something real, something that had always been part of her story even if she had not known it. And for the first time, she did not just hear the music, she remembered the feeling of holding it, the quiet moment where everything else faded and all that mattered was the promise that someone would keep something safe for her. And she let out a small breath she did not realize she had been holding, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "You really came back every week." And Daniel gave a slight nod, his expression steady but no longer closed. "I said I would wait," he replied simply. And there was no weight in the words this time, no burden, just truth. The restaurant moved around them as it always did, people coming and going, conversations blending into a quiet hum. But at that table, something had settled into place. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to change what came next, because the space that had once held an absence was now filled with something else, something quiet and real, and neither of them felt the need to rush it, to define it, or to explain it beyond what it already was. two people sitting across from each other, no longer separated by time, but connected by a promise that had finally found its way back. The Fridays that followed did not feel the same anymore, not because the routine disappeared, but because it no longer carried the weight of waiting alone, and Claire noticed it in the smallest ways. The way Daniel no longer checked the door every few minutes, the way his shoulders seemed lighter when he sat down, the way the music box, once a symbol of something unfinished, now rested on the table like something that had finally found its place. And yet, what surprised her most was not how much he had changed, but how much she had. She still ran her company, still made decisions that affected hundreds of people, still moved through a world that demanded certainty and control. But every Friday at 7:15, she chose something else, something quieter, something that did not require her to lead or solve or prove anything. She simply showed up, sat across from Daniel, and let the space between them unfold naturally. And over time, that space began to fill with stories, not all at once, not in long explanations, but in small pieces that came when they were ready. Daniel told her about the years before that day, about how his life had once been full in a way that felt distant now, about the small routines he had lost and the ones he had created to replace them. And Claire listened, not as someone collecting information, but as someone who understood what it meant to build a life around something missing. And in return, she began to share pieces of her own story, carefully at first, then with more honesty as the weeks passed, about growing up too fast, about learning early. That stability was something you created for yourself, about the way success had filled her time but not always her silence. One evening, as the music box played between them, Daniel asked, "Did you ever try to find this place again?" And Claire paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass as she considered the question. "I think I forgot I was supposed to," she admitted quietly. "Not because it did not matter, but because life kept moving, and I learned how to move with it." And Daniel nodded, not in judgment, but in understanding, because he knew what it meant to hold on to something when everything else moved forward without it. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the melody filling the space in a way that words did not need to. But not everything settled easily, and Claire began to notice that while Daniel no longer waited for someone who might not come, there was still a part of him that had not fully stepped away from that version of his life, a hesitation, a quiet distance that appeared in certain moments, like he was unsure what came after waiting, unsure how to exist in a space that was no longer defined by a promise he had already kept. And one Friday, when the music box finished playing and the silence lingered a little longer than usual, Claire looked at him and said softly, "You do not have to keep coming here for the same reason anymore." And Daniel met her gaze, steady but thoughtful. "I know," he replied, his voice calm, "but I am not sure what replaces it yet." And that was the moment Claire understood something important, that this was not just about a promise fulfilled, it was about what came next, about learning how to stay without the need to wait. And she gave a small, reassuring smile, the kind that did not rush him, did not push him forward, but simply met him where he was. "Then maybe you do not replace it," she said gently. "Maybe you just let it become something new." And Daniel considered her words quietly, his eyes softening in a way that suggested he was beginning to see that possibility, not fully, not all at once, but enough to take the first step toward it. And as the evening continued, the rhythm of the restaurant steady around them, it became clear that what had started as a simple question had turned into something neither of them had expected, not just a connection to the past, but the beginning of something that asked both of them to choose what came next, not out of obligation, but out of something far more personal, something that was slowly, quietly becoming impossible to ignore. The first Friday Daniel did not show up. The chair across from Claire stayed empty in a way it had not since she had started coming. And she told herself it should not matter, that people miss nights, that routines change. But as the clock passed 7:15 and the music box did not appear, something inside her felt unexpectedly unsettled, like a rhythm she had come to rely on had been quietly removed without warning. And she found herself looking toward the door more than once, catching her own reflection in the window and realizing she was doing exactly what he used to do, waiting without meaning to. She stayed longer than she planned, long enough for the restaurant to shift into a slower pace, long enough for the staff to begin clearing nearby tables. And when it became clear he was not coming, She stood up slowly, her hand resting for a second on the back of his chair before she pulled away. The absence of the music box leaving the table feeling incomplete in a way she had not expected. That night, back in her office, she tried to return to her usual focus, but the quiet kept drifting back to him, to the way he had said he did not know what came next. And for the first time, Claire understood that this was not just about curiosity or connection anymore. It was about concern, about not wanting someone who had finally begun to step forward to retreat into something silent again. And without giving herself too much time to overthink it, she asked one of her managers for the reservation logs, scanning through names until she found his, Daniel Brooks, along with a phone number he had only used once. And she hesitated for a moment, not because she did not want to call, but because she understood that crossing this line meant choosing to be part of his life beyond the boundaries they had quietly respected. And then she pressed call. The phone rang longer than she expected, each second stretching slightly, until finally it clicked, and his voice came through, softer than usual, like it had not been used much that day. "Hello." And Claire felt a small wave of relief she had not prepared for, steadying her voice before speaking. "It is Claire," she said, keeping it simple, and there was a brief pause on the other end, not confusion, but recognition settling in. "You were not there tonight," she added, not accusing, not questioning, just stating what she had felt, and Daniel exhaled quietly, the sound carrying something heavier than his words. "I know," he replied, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence different now, not shared in the same space but still connected. And Claire stepped closer to the window in her office, looking out at the city lights as if grounding herself in something steady. "Are you okay?" she asked, the question simple but carrying more meaning than it might have a few weeks ago, and Daniel took a second before answering. "I went somewhere I had not been in a long time," he said, his voice calm but distant. "I thought I should." And Claire felt that quiet pull again, the same one that had brought her to his table the first time, guiding her without forcing anything. "Can I come?" she asked, the words leaving her before she could fully measure them. But once spoken, they felt right, and there was another pause, longer this time. But not closed, not resistant, just thoughtful. And when Daniel finally spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly, softer, more open. "It is a cemetery," he said, not as a warning, but as a truth, and Claire did not hesitate. "Not this time. Send me the address," she replied gently. And as she ended the call, something inside her settled into place, because whatever this next step was, whatever part of his past he had returned to tonight, she knew one thing clearly now. She was not going to let him walk through it alone again. The cemetery was quieter than Claire expected, not empty, but still in a way that made every step feel more deliberate. And as she followed the narrow path lined with soft grass and small white stones, she saw Daniel standing near the far edge, his figure outlined by the low glow of a nearby lamp. And for a moment she did not call out to him. She simply walked closer, letting the distance close naturally until he turned slightly, as if he had already known she would come. "You found it," he said gently, and Claire nodded, her breath steady, her presence calm. "You sent me here," she replied, and there was something different in her voice now, something grounded, like she had stepped fully into whatever this moment was meant to be. Daniel looked back toward the headstone in front of him, and Claire followed his gaze, her eyes settling on the name carved into the stone, a name that did not belong to the story she had been building in her mind. And for a second, confusion passed through her quietly, not disrupting the moment, but reshaping it, because the timeline she had imagined shifted, and she understood that this place was not about the girl he had waited for, but about something deeper, something that had existed long before that promise. "My daughter," Daniel said softly, his voice carrying a truth he had not spoken aloud to her before, and Claire felt her chest tighten slightly, not from shock, but from the weight of understanding that followed, because now she saw it clearly. The reason he knew how to wait, the reason he had held on to a promise that was never his to begin with, the reason he had not walked away from something unfinished. And she stepped closer, her presence quiet but steady beside him, not replacing anything, not filling a space that did not belong to her, but simply standing there, sharing it. "I used to come here every week," Daniel continued after a moment, his eyes still on the stone, "before the restaurant, before the music box became part of it. and he let out a slow breath, the kind that carried both memory and release. I think I just moved the waiting somewhere else. And Claire understood that immediately, because she had done the same thing in her own way, turning absence into routine, turning silence into something structured enough to live with. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet around them holding everything that did not need to be said. Then Claire reached into her coat pocket and slowly pulled out the small envelope again, the same one she had placed on the table, and she looked at it for a second before holding it out slightly, not as something to give back, but as something to acknowledge. You did not just keep a promise, she said gently, her voice soft but certain. You gave it somewhere to survive. And Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, not as someone who had returned for something he had protected, but as someone who understood what that protection had meant, and something in his expression shifted again, deeper this time, like a door he had kept closed out of habit was finally opening without resistance.